So some additional resources. This class really could have been a 6-week series, so it was incredibly challenging to just whittle it down to just 3 weeks. And when I went home last week, I had to take out an insane amount of content that I wanted to include, and it was really hard because there's so much to discuss. So a couple of resources that we have that we're just not going to be able to reference in depth at all. Chrissy Moore on the Buck Run YouTube channel, she taught a 6 weeks class, 6 Christian women everyone should know, women of the church. Did anyone in here take that? The class was pretty full. Like, I thought it was amazing. And in that class, she obviously discusses 6 Christian women. Everyone should know. But the thing that's revealed is you see that every one of these women had difficult people in their lives. They had difficult relationships. Some people had more than one difficult person, but it is a great class. And I don't want to assume that everyone knows how to use the YouTube channel specifically. So instead of just going to YouTube in general and typing in Chrissy Moore, what you can do is go to the Buck Run channel, and when you see like the little magnifying glass, you would type in Chrissy Moore, or you could type that in, and that way it's just searching just on the Buck Run YouTube page, and it's not searching the entire web for Chrissy Moore, so it kind of whittles it down. And Daniel said he was going to put a link to this on the YouTube channel, so people that are following at home are going to be able to have like that direct link. So you all definitely want to check it out. She is such a great teacher and just has such joy, and her class was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. One of the people that she went over was Katarina von Bora Luther, and you got to really see behind the scenes just some of the difficult people that she encountered, even with her spouse, because he was kind of grumpy. And you got to kind of see how she interacted with him, and she didn't take those things personally. So definitely check those out. It honestly is a super easy listen. She based it on a book, and so you all could even get that if you choose. Speaking of books, don't forget that if you really wanted to take this class to the next level, you could get the Abigail Study, the book that I discussed last week. It's nothing like this class. It's just completely different content. There's a ton of homework, but it really gets you thinking about the material. Another book, Candace and Tanya recommended Unoffendable by Brant, Hansen. Has anyone listened to that podcast or read that book? The book is basically like, the premise is we give ourselves grace, but we can struggle with extending it to others. And so that is a great extension to this class. We can also use anger to kind of stop us from evangelism, because we get in the way. We get in the way of ourselves and just get all wrapped up in our feelings. So that's a book that you all could read. His podcast is a little bit harder for me to listen to. Like, there's a lot of extra noises, and my brain is like, it's a lot for my brain. So the book is a little better for me. Like, I need quiet when I'm reading. And so, Candace even mentioned that it's a book that you could reread, like it's one of those that you kind of want to keep on hand. So definitely keep that in mind. Next Sunday, we start a new series of classes. This class is going to be really like a natural progression. So Tanya's teaching a class, it's Wise Living, Wisdom Literature is a Path to Growth. So that is going to be a natural progression from this class on how we can be wise. Also, Dr. York is going to be teaching The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. So, I mean, I think I'm probably going to watch that one at home, because I'm probably going to have some tears because I'm going to feel real convicted. But that's a great way to use the YouTube channel, is because I feel like all of us aren't going to be able to be in all these places at once. Chris is teaching a class, the Psalms, and so that partners really well with these other two classes. And so don't forget that we have the YouTube channel, because that's a great resource when we just can't be in all those classes. And I'm going to share something without someone's permission, but she's in the class, so if she throws something at me, then you know that, that she didn't want me to share it. But Marcia wrote something on her Facebook page this week, and I just thought it went so well with this class. And some of you all may have read it, but she does these ponderings, and I absolutely love them, and we'll go back and read them over and over again. But she put this week's pondering: all of the things in our lives that are not the way we would have them to be are the way our sovereign God would have them be, to better mold us into the likeness of his Son. Molding is generally not possible without pushing, prodding, and discomfort, if not all-out pain. Or, better restated, all the things in my life that are not the way I would have them be are the way my sovereign God would have them be, to better mold me into the likeness of his Son. Molding is generally not possible without pushing, prodding, and discomfort, if not all-out pain. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, thank you so much for giving us this class. Thank you for giving us wise women like Marcia to learn from. All of us in here, we are either difficult, or all of us are difficult. We know of someone that's really challenging in our lives and just hasn't made it easy, but you have them there for a reason. And I am so grateful that you've brought all of us together with all of our different experiences to help each other to grow in our likeness and be more like you. And thank you so much for this time that you've given us. We just love you so much, and open our minds and our hearts to hear the word that you would have us hear. In your name I pray, amen. Marcia, that got me all emotional. Do you ever read that? Like sometimes you're just like, well, okay, that was like 2 paragraphs and it just like hit all the feels. So that's what that was. So, sorry. Okay, so we stopped last week. We are going to start back up on verse 21. So 1 Samuel 25. I know this is like just jumping right in, but we have a lot to get through. So 1 Samuel 25, verse 21. Now David had said, surely in vain have I guarded all that his fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. So we can see David is still really miffed. So he's like, but look at what I've done. Look at what I have done. Surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. Your mouth speaks what's in your heart. I would argue that David didn't probably go into it saying, I'm going to do all this so that someone could repay me. And I think that a lot of us go into things and we're not doing it with the intent to be repaid. But the second that someone doesn't recognize something, all of a sudden you're like, now hold up a minute. Look at everything that I've done. Are there areas where you all do this, like motherhood, being a wife? Do you do it at work? Look at what I've done.
Simply the thank you way, when you let somebody in front of you.
Right, right. Like you're in traffic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that how do you do it like more elbow? Is that, okay. Yeah. I like that. My dad does that. Daddy drives and he does this. Like, that's Daddy's drive. But you want like that little acknowledgement. Like when you're letting someone over in traffic, all you just want is like the little like, gotcha, thanks. And then when you don't get that, you're like, huh, okay. Right. Like you feel that kind of well up. So again, it's not that you're going into it with that intention. But I think we can kind of understand how David just gets miffed over something that doesn't seem really like he wasn't doing it for return. But it reveals something in our hearts. But also when someone else is doing this, and being difficult, it reveals something in their heart. And most likely we can help them with that because we know how that feels. So when someone is reacting that way, we can instantly go, I know how that feels. Somebody's done that to me. So now let's go to verse 23 through 31. This one's a little bit of a long read, but it all needs to be read together. So when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from your blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in care of the Lord your God. And in the lives of the enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. Bless you. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord, you shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. Wow. That is a posture of humility right there. Like, you can't help but read that. And I think sometimes when you read a passage quietly, sometimes you can not hear the words or the word repetition. And sometimes when you read something out loud, you can hear how many times she's saying Lord with a capital L. But you could also hear, as you're reading it out loud, she has that posture of humility. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't have anything she needed to apologize for, but she falls at his feet. She calls out God's plan for David and reminds him of who he belongs to. So we don't have like the whole passage that explains Abigail knows the Lord and she was saved when she was 8. Like, we don't have all of that, but we can infer based upon what she is saying right then that she does by the way she's using the capital L Lord and the lowercase Lord referring to David. But she uses that capital L Lord 7 times. Abigail didn't jump off her high horse and say, you need to. Oh yeah, well, you need to. She got off her donkey and fell at his feet. In the Bible, horses were symbols of war and donkeys were commonly associated with pursuits of peace. I love that tiny detail. Like, it's such like a tiny detail. Like, if you're reading it so quickly, you would just be like, well, okay, maybe people ride donkeys. But it's like when you put it in context, you're like, they're symbols of peace. And she got off of her donkey and fell at his feet. So she's a peacemaker and a truth speaker. So she made David remember the big picture. His feelings didn't really matter, so she brought God to David's mind. We know he knows God, and we know he knows right from wrong. But in the heat of the moment, we can act that way and show our emotions are kings of our lives. Like, we can instantly just go 0 to 60 in those moments. Abigail pointed David to the king repeatedly and with humility and snacks. And we know from the previous week, that's all that, like, all he was asking for was like, hey, could I have some snacks for my buddies? I'm just looking for a little hospitality. But it shows you that food really can be that way. That's like, she might be talking to David in that moment, And odds are there's people around. Some of his men are around. But she also is saying for all of these men that are ready to go, she's like, oh, hey guys, I brought some snacks. Instantly that's going to kind of like shift their focus from wanting to go. And so she has their attention. So she's speaking to David, but she has the attention of everyone because the hospitality she's showing. So going, yes, right, exactly, yeah. So go back to verse 26. So it's kind of like assuming self-sufficiency. It's taking matters into your own hands, wanting control. She's reminding him in that moment. And if we know from reading chapter 24, David had a chance to kill Saul and did not. One day we can trust God with our difficult person and be like, this is so great, everything's working out. And then the next difficult person, we just take matters into our own hands. So we see in these two chapters, verse 24, it's like, oh God, I trust you. And then he gets refused snacks. And then he's ready to kill someone. So we see like who's being difficult in these two chapters. So verses 32 and 34. And David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me? Truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal as much as one male. So David quickly recognized the Lord had sent Abigail. Like he instantly snaps out of it and is like, oh, he brought Abigail to me. He snapped out of wanting justice as he defined it and from taking matters into his own hands. Abigail tells David it's God's business and he'll handle it. And David responded, you're right. Like he instantly snapped out of it. Like all he needed was like that voice of reason. It was a moment of clarity, but also eternal perspective. And it wasn't about how he just felt in that moment with a difficult person. So Proverbs 12:18, there's one whose rash words are like sword thrust, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. God's going to be the judge. He doesn't need us to call up our posse and draw our swords towards our difficult person. When we have an interaction with a difficult person, we need to be like Abigail and remind ourselves who we are in Christ. And again, believers should be believable. If we're just letting every moment dictate how we feel and how we respond, well, who's really in control? I would even argue we're not in control because our emotions are ruling. So on to verse 35 through 38. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, go up in peace to your house. So I have obeyed your voice and have granted your petition. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and in his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Oh, that's heavy. So what does culture tell us about what we're supposed to do with our difficult people? Anyone? Like, culture kind of tells us to cut them out. Like, you don't have to deal with that. That's fine. You don't have to deal with that person. Your happiness is important. You need to be happy.
Or we're told to stand up for ourselves.
Right. Like, there's everyone, it's okay to be offended and you can live in that offense and, that requires you to respond to that offense. So, but there's a disagreement or a differing opinion and it can either turn us into a Nabal and we can refuse hospitality to that person. We can become a David and we can grab our swords and our friends like, do you know what so-and-so did to me? Or we can be an Abigail in these moments. And we have to figure out, like, who are we going to be in these moments? How many of you have called up your friend or family member and said, man, this coworker is so difficult. Will you pray with me about changing my heart? I mean, I've not done that. I mean, I know I've had a difficult coworker, but, you know.
Ask people to pray to change their heart.
Right.
And that's pretty irritating.
Right. And so it's like, but really we have to say, change my heart. What is it that I'm lacking in this moment where I'm showing compassion for this person or kindness for this person? And again, we're not talking about those extreme abuse situations that we covered in the first class, and those certainly should be addressed, but there is a more specific way to address those extreme situations. We're talking about the everyday normal things that we would run into. With a biblical perspective in mind, have you all prayed for your neighbor? Like, have you specifically sat down and said, I'm going to pray for your neighbor? And that was part of our homework this week. Like, it's hard to sit down and write out a prayer. When I sat down and I started to write out my prayer, everything instantly was like, sort of like, well, if they would, I could. And it's okay if you didn't necessarily write it out, but just saying that prayer every single day for a week that you have for that difficult person, how it changes from Monday to Friday. All of a sudden, like, there's a softness that comes to it because you start seeing things revealed about yourself, which is like exactly what they said, that you're just like, my difficult person is revealing something that I need to work on in myself. So 3 things we should do when we pray for the difficult person in our life. Ask the Lord to be the judge. That's not us. We have such a limited, tiny perspective of what's going on with that person and why they're being difficult. And we might even have, for those of us who have a difficult person, that it's like a more intimate relationship, it's like a family member. You probably have a greater grasp or understanding on what those things are. But just ask the Lord to be the judge and be sure your heart's in the right posture. Our understanding and awareness is just so limited, but we have to also be aware that in those moments, we might be the one that gets disciplined. So when we're asking God, okay, you be the judge of them, we can't just sit back and be like, okay, God, it is your time to judge them. Like, we have already decided that we know that they're 100% wrong and there is no work that we need to do. And so we need to make sure that we're going with the correct posture and realize that there might be some discipline and some discomfort that happens, like to Marcia's post, that there's, some things that we need to work on in ourselves as well. So the second thing is ask the Lord to reveal your blind spot. So that can be really challenging. Just because someone or people have been gracious to you, that doesn't mean you aren't being the difficult person too. And I think sometimes that's what we can do, is just be like, I don't have anything to work on. People like me, or whatever. And we have like a real blind spot. And what we should be realizing is people are being gracious to us in the ways that we can be difficult. You may have nabled. I decided that I was going to turn that into a verb. So you may have nabled them into retreat when they came to you out of love and wisdom. There was one time years and years and years ago that Tanya and my mom always did dish duty at my Mimi and Papa's house. And their kitchen table was like right here. And then the kitchen sink was right here. And so, it's like a little 2-sink thing, and it was always like Gloria and Tanya. Like, they always had dish duty. And so I was seated at the table, and there they are doing dishes, and was an extraordinarily difficult season brought on by myself. And Tanya turned around, she had her hands in the sink, and she looked at me and she said something truly out of love and wisdom, and I really bit her head off. And I was speaking out of my hurt, my confusion, my embarrassment, my shame. And that then, it didn't just end there. I've kind of shared this before, but it led to literally years of separation for us. Like one of the people I would say I'm the closest to on the face of the earth and love nearly more than anyone, I just was like, nope. There was so much distance and space, and it was just easier to do that. I just had such a blind spot, and all she was trying to do out of love that she had shown me for decades, all she was doing was just speaking out of love. I just snapped at her and bit her head off. And I really did not use that wisdom in that moment. So if someone comes to you all, you need to make sure that you realize they're coming more than likely from a place of love and wisdom, and they're trying to help. So it's not that it's not going to sting, but we need to be in control of our emotions. So thank you. And thanks for always doing the dishes. Yeah. So the other thing, if needed, you need to pray for reconciliation. Not everyone's going to have a difficult person they need reconciliation with, because sometimes they're a difficult person. It isn't that type of relationship, but if needed, you need to pray for that reconciliation. And often it doesn't happen because the hurt and uncomfortableness has become really comfortable and familiar. And like living in that just is like, well, this is what I know. And if I go, 5 degrees out of this, that's where I start to feel uncomfortable, and I don't want to be hurt again, so I can't do this. This is just too hard. So we can hold on so tightly to our hurts and slights that there's just no room for God to do his work. Like, we're just determined that that's what we're holding on to. We're not holding on to God. We're holding on to our hurt. Spurgeon said, anything is a blessing that causes us to pray. So if you all really need to reconcile with someone, then pray for reconciliation. Keep that in your prayer with this difficult person. So let's go to verses 39 through 44. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. And David also took, how do you say that? Anoam of Jezreel, and both, I even looked it up and just totally blanked on it. And both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Golim. So how many times do you hear Abigail after this one chapter? Like after 1 Samuel 25, there's a lot of the Bible left. Like they actually reference her one more time, and it's giving birth to David's second-born son. Just one more time. So do you all keep in touch with your high school friends? Like all of them? Like every single person that you went to high school with? I'm not talking about you super young ones, but... So do you keep up with like every coworker you've ever worked with? Because at every job, there's always like certain coworkers that you're like, oh, this is my crew. I love them. And they leave and you're so sad. And then you just never speak to them again. So you can change the trajectory of someone's eternal future with the one chapter you have in their story. And we need to keep that in mind. That we can look at Abigail and she's in this one chapter. This one chapter. And do you see how she changed David in a moment? We can actually do that in someone's life. And that might be our difficult person. We can also make the ending of 1 Samuel 25 sound so romantic because it's like, oh my gosh, isn't that so great that she married David? And, it just sounds so romantic. Well, but if you take a step back, you're like, okay, her husband had just died. And it doesn't matter if he was just a complete fool. It was still her husband. I mean, she was obviously very committed to him. So she's going to have all of those emotions. She also was obviously living a decent life regarding accommodations. We see how much food she had at her disposal, water, necessities. And so now she's going to live in the wilderness with David, and they're not alone. We know that there's all of his men. So she's immediately going to this situation. And we can make it sound so romantic, but then we also know what happens with David. And it's two difficult people that are broken getting married. And they're in a difficult situation. And they're getting married. And both of them are bringing their difficult situations together to be difficult, all in one time. And so we have to make sure that we're reading that. We're like, wow, in spite of everything that's going on, she was obedient and she was kind. And then we don't hear from her again. And you're like, that one chapter is so significant. But difficult people are broken. Broken people are also hurt people. Healed people offer healing. Do you all do that with your broken part or your difficult person? Do you offer healing or do you offer space? Do you offer grace? Or you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. They're just too much for me. No matter what happens with your neighbor, God is sufficient. If you focus on the difficult person in your life, you're not focusing on the sufficiency of God. I've done that. I've sat down and thought about my difficult person, and I'm just like, this is just too much. And then I realized that the more I think about that difficult person, the less I'm thinking about God, because I'm focused on that person instead of what God can do. So I'm allowing this person to do what this person can do, but I'm not allowing God to do what God can do. So we need to keep that in mind. Colossians 3:12 through 14. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other as the Lord has forgiven you. So you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So where's the gospel in all this? Apart from Christ, we're enemies and hostile. Before Christ, we all looked different. And if there's no difference, I would argue that you probably just know about God and you don't actually know God. We would be neighbors, but because of the gospel, we're different. We can sit here and hopefully we're not fools like Nabal because of God. Colossians 1:21, and you who once were alienated, hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. That was us. Romans 8:7, for the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. So I think it was funny when Michelle came in class, she referenced who she kind of felt most similar to in 1 Samuel 25. And for me, Nabal can feel more relatable to me as my before because I was someone who knew of Christ for a large portion of my life. And frankly, I thought I was saved. I really did. I grew up in church. I thought I was saved. I just thought I am really wildly backslidden. I just thought that that's what was happening. I had really fooled myself into thinking because I'm in church, I know God. And that wasn't true. If you think back to last week, you can remember that verse where Nabal was talking. It was like, my, I. Like in one sentence, he just referenced himself so many times. We will either make it about us or we're going to choose to make it about God. And so when you're thinking about your difficult person, you need to think, am I making this about me or am I making this about God? Do you identify with Abigail? She could have let fear stop her. She was steady and courageous. She drew strength from the Lord. She delivered words that may have been hard to say but needed to be heard. She brought the Lord to David's mind. She reminded him God had greater things for him than indulging in temporal feelings. She even said, the blame is on me. She did so with humility. Was Abigail being an image bearer? Yes, she really was. And I understand that not every difficult person is going to be saved. We're not bringing God to someone's mind. They do not know him, but we could bring God into their life. But we could certainly bring ourselves into their life and our own feelings, and we need to be careful with that. This is a story of brokenness and redemption. Abigail had to be humble and bold. She could have said the right thing in the wrong way, and the outcome could have been very different. She used discernment and acted quickly to right the wrong. We need to make sure we're doing that. So here's some practical takeaways from 1 Samuel 25. If you need to speak to someone, go to church leadership. I'm going to say they've probably heard everything. People are wildly sinful and wildly broken. They have probably heard of everything. If you don't feel comfortable going to church leadership, you can go to a pastor's wife. Guess what? They've heard everything. And so if you need to speak to someone, go to someone and speak to them in a place of leadership. Choose that person wisely. Number 2, your difficult person isn't as unique as you think they are. I think what we can do is we can hide that out of embarrassment or shame. And I think also as the difficult person becomes closer to you, the more private it feels, because you want to protect that person or you feel embarrassed or whatever it is. Now, that doesn't mean you go and you just air your dirty laundry and you just blab all over Facebook. That's not what I'm saying. But you definitely can feel like, oh, no one really knows what this is. Like, I would say in a room this size with this many women, like, all of us have probably experienced the same thing, just, different names. But we've all probably experienced the same thing. It can be a strained relationship with your mom or dad because they're difficult. It can be a sibling who decides to come out of the woodwork when someone dies just to get their portion. It can be an awful boss or an overly harsh coworker. It can be someone within these walls. People are difficult. Don't be embarrassed about your difficult relationship. Satan can use these difficult relationships to push you away from God. He looks for every little tiny fissure and crack to get in there. And if he can get your focus off of God, he's going to use any way that he can, and that can be your difficult person. Like eyes on this instead of on God. Eyes on this. You need to be focused on the way you're feeling. Know you're hurt. I want you to live in that. And then you're not looking to God. So again, your difficult person isn't as unique or as unusual as you think. And figuring out that right person to connect with that shares that same hurt and difficult person can really help you grow in Christ. Because they're pushing you towards Christ. They're not enabling you. Not enabling, enable. I just got that. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So have other Titus 2 women you can reach out to. So I sometimes I do this thing where you hear common phrases and you'll hear certain thing that church people say and you're like, what's that mean? And so you're like, I'm not really sure what that means. Well, go read Titus 2. And you'll know what that means. But my sister and I are really close in age, and I'll say I was rather misfortunate looking. My puberty really hit me hard and lasted a long time. And there was a whole lot for a lot of people to like really make fun of me about, and I don't think anyone missed a chance and at all. And so, it was hard. And my sister, like I said, we're just really close in age. And there was one time on the school bus that this person made a comment, and I get it. I have big teeth, like imagine when they're like really super crooked. And this person was like, decided to make a comment about my teeth. And I'll never forget, my sister had this red tulip skirt on. It was so beautiful. And she had this white poet blouse on because those were big in the 80s. And I remember like she jumped up and it was like she ran over to that person and she was like, "That's my sister." And like she screamed in their face. Because this was like someone that was considerably older that was making fun of me in front of everyone in the bus, and she just was not having it. I would say probably 50 other times that's my sister's battle cry, that she would hear someone say something and she would run after them and say, "That's my sister." And that's what we need to do for each other. We need to say, "That's my sister." We're the Titus 2 women. Like, I'm not saying you have to go to war for someone, but you can go to war in prayer. You can go to war in encouragement. Like, you need to make sure that you're calling on each other. Like, that's my sister. That should be, you all are my sisters. Like, that makes me emotional. Like, you all are my sisters. Like, we should have that battle cry. I want to point you all to God. So, left to our own resources, we're wounded and weary. We need anything that's going to bring biblical wisdom into our lives and remind us who is in control of our lives, and that's God. So the fourth thing, be aware of who you call on. Don't be the one who yells to your friends, "Strap on your swords." You have brokenness just like your difficult person. If you partner with someone, do they feed the fire that increases that difficulty? Is that person like, "Oh yeah, they were really mean when they said that to you"? Is that the person that like you really should be going to? Like, if you instantly think right now and think of someone that says that to you, that's an indication that's not the person to go to. You're going to them probably before you go to God and have that conversation with him. It isn't helpful, ladies. We need to strap on kindness and grace and compassion and discernment. We need to be ready to battle, but not with other people, but with against darkness. Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You only have to be silent. What do you do when you pray? You're silent. Like, you're sitting down and you're having that quiet time with God. You're not going around when you're saying something to your friend, you're not sitting there going, like, you can have like crazy silence like that, but when you're in prayer, you're silent. You're taking it to him. So the fifth thing, ask yourself about your difficult person. What does love look like in this situation? So when that person's being difficult, ask yourself, what does love look like in this situation? That can be keeping your mouth shut. Love can actually look like keeping your mouth shut. Going and sitting in a closet like I did when I was in the Dominican because that ukulele was about to drive me bonkers. So that you have to think, what does love look like in this situation? Is that firing off that email at work because your coworker really bothered you and your boss needs to know? Probably not. I mean, your boss probably doesn't need to know. What does that look like when your spouse is being, maybe their tone is really short with you, and then you're just like, what does love look like in this situation? Well, it doesn't mean I respond with shortness and nastiness as well. So really, what does it look like in that situation? Proverbs 3:5-6. Did somebody raise their hand, or was somebody just doing? Okay. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Number 6, avoid revenge. We can wrap up the word revenge and package it to look like this Hollywood villain where, it's going to be, I'm going to show my age, like the old Batman where it's like the Joker or something wearing like a unitard and has like question marks all over him, like the Riddler or the Penguin, or, we can make a villain look like that, like a crazy person. And so what we're thinking is, wow, that's what revenge is. Like, I'm going to get revenge on that terrible person. But then when you think, wait, have I responded in coldness? Is that revenge? Like, is coldness like a revenge response? Well, you're being the villain in that. Like, you're looking like that crazy person in a unitard. And do you give the silent treatment? Like, I'm just not going to talk to them. I'm doing my work, so I'm just going to ignore them. And then you justify your silent treatment to them by saying, well, see, I'm not saying anything. But again, it's the posture of your heart. Kelly, I just looked at you, but it wasn't on purpose. So don't you hate when you do that? You're like, no, that wasn't towards you. Or was it? No, would you like to share? So being a believer in Jesus is built on not getting what we deserve. We have committed terrible crimes against God and Him not giving us what we deserve. If that doesn't buckle your knees, I don't know what will. He's not giving us what we deserve. Why do we feel like we need to give somebody else what we think they need to deserve? Number 7, seek peace. This goes beyond just not getting revenge. It's active. Seek. It is active. It isn't passive. You can read Romans 12:16 through 21. In light of the sacrifices of Jesus that He's made for us, seek peace. Like, when you sit there and think of the sacrifices that He made for us, is it worth it? Like, seek peace. Number 8, God brings or lets difficult people remain in our lives to build character and allows us to know more about Him. That's exactly what you all said earlier. We often want those difficult people to just be out of our lives because it would be easier. It would just be so much easier if I didn't have to deal with this person. But that's not true. My life actually might be easier, but might not be as sanctified because of that person. And sanctification, it's not easy. It is so hard. And so God is using that difficult person as part of your sanctification process. And He's just like, kind of like getting out, He's purifying that gold. That's a great way to look at it. So number 9, don't lose your spiritual fervor. Fervor, it's intense, it's passionate, it's feeling, it's zeal, it's earnestness. With your difficult person, where have you placed your fervor? Have you placed your fervor with like foolishness with your difficult person, or have you placed it with your Father? Because you can still have a spiritual fervor for your difficult person. Now, that might mean that the best thing is for you to have some space with that person, but you can still have spiritual fervor praying for them. It's okay to have some space with people, but you can still pray for them. And you can pray for them passionately and with zeal and be very earnest about it. So number 10, be patient. We're all a work in progress. Like, I'm surprised I don't have caution tape wrapped around my whole body. Just be gracious to others and be compassionate. We're all messed up in one way or another. We really are. Most of us don't know how the other ones are. And some people, you think you're hiding it. You're not. Like, we can see it, but we're being gracious. Be gracious to people. A pattern is different from a mistake, but they both could use love and grace. And you have that. And you have that to offer. You have a lot of that to offer. So within that, cling to what's good. So when you're thinking of that difficult person, it's okay to have boundaries around sinful behavior and evil behavior, but don't let those become your focus. Sometimes you have to really look at what are they really, what's good about them? Gosh, their lawn always looks so great. And that might sound crazy, but when you start thinking about just something positive about them, think, oh, they really love dogs. That can be a really good thing. You can say, they smell really nice and don't wear too much perfume. But I'm serious, like, you have to sometimes really think, what is that good thing that I could focus, that just shifts my thinking about them just enough. And then that's kind of where you kind of get that traction to start praying for them with that fervor. And within that, show respect. God loved you and your brokenness, and he alone is going to equip you to sacrificially love your difficult person and their brokenness. But it's going to come from God. But show that person respect. So let's do a recap of 1 Samuel 25. So let's first discuss Nabal. So he's mentioned 18 times. So 18 times he's mentioned. He was foolish and rude. His tone was a dismissive nature. He played into instigating someone else to be difficult, David. He insults David after he was shown protection by him and his army. He benefited directly from David. We see that in verses 10 and 11. It was customary to show hospitality, but he also, during the sheep shearing time, he wronged a right. Like, he did the opposite. They're supposed to be righting wrongs, and he wronged a right. He should have shown hospitality times 2, but he didn't. Nabal responded from a place of scarcity and not abundance. And we know he could have given, because instantly we saw what Abigail did. So we know it was literally readily available. Like, he had the resources and the means to be able to do this. We also know that he had an issue with pride and ego. The servant tells us in verse 17, no one can speak to him. That's pride and ego. He was overindulgent. We see that in verse 36. He was so interested in his own fulfillment and happiness that he didn't have a capacity for others. It was just strictly about him and filling himself up. And the last thing is, his heart died in him. Verses 37 and 38. How sad. I couldn't help but think about people that wear their heart on their sleeve. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because you know they care about stuff. Like, their heart's like on the outside. You see, oh, they're wearing their heart on their sleeve. Nabal, his heart was within him. So what did he care about? Like, we see what he cared about. He cared about himself. His heart was within him. And everything he did showed that, and he became a stone. I just find that, like, wording extraordinarily tragic and revealing. David, he's mentioned over 1,000 times. Nabal is a tiny little blink in the overall story of David. Again, 18 times, over 1,000 times. But Nabal is a tiny little blink in how David's going to be used. David's story could have been vastly different had he responded to one of his difficult people in the way he wanted to. He was running from a difficult person. While in that space and grief, he encountered another difficult person. So it's not like, oh, we're just going to have like one difficult person. Like, some of us in here are going to have a difficult coworker and a difficult family member and a friend that's kind of wonky and difficult, and you're trying to figure out, what that is. I mean, we can have more than one difficult person in different areas in our life. So David and his army showed kindness to Nabal and his workers. This act allowed Nabal's men to work and prosper. Nabal gained and drained. Is that what you all are doing with other people? Are you gaining from certain things that they're doing and pouring into you, and then you're just draining them with all your negative energy, or you're being difficult? So do you pour into other people, or do you drain them? David was pouring into them and saying, I'm going to protect everything that you have, and I'm going to protect your men. I'm going to do this. And I'm sure that was tiresome for all involved. So David was not out of line asking for snacks or hospitality. That was a totally normal thing. Like, culturally, that was a really normal thing to get snacks, refreshment, whatever it is, hospitality. Now, granted, it was larger than what most people would ask for, but we also know Nabal could spare it. We go back to Elijah and the widow. She gave all she had. Nabal didn't want to give any he had. So you can see that compare and contrast. So are we being good stewards of what God has given us? So even when we have something, Are we giving that? Are we giving more? Are we trusting God that he'll provide? David's ego and pride got hurt, so his immediate reaction was revenge, and his voice led others to join what was really going to be a bloodbath. Our words can pull others into the brokenness, so we have to be careful with that. So we see Nabal's ego and pride, and then we also see David's ego and pride. Nabal's first, and how that brought on David's, and how that just kind of was going to keep going. This was also generational revenge. He wanted something that would have a lasting legacy. You don't do this to me, I want your whole household to suffer. I mean, we see it's generational suffering for one transgression. Are you the generation that suffered, but through the Holy Spirit, you're breaking that cycle? It is so hard to be a generation that breaks a cycle. And there might be people in here that are doing that. It's really hard to be like, I'm not going to go into that generation where they did this, or this is the way they spoke, or this is the way they acted. Words and actions are lasting. When I was in second grade, a million years ago, my second grade teacher, in front of the entire class, because I couldn't write in cursive, said, "Are you stupid?" Now, I'm not saying that against all teachers, so I don't need like emails. But my point is, that happened when I was in second grade. She said it one time, and I remember. And that is 43 years later. I had to stop it. Let me do this math. 43 years later, one sentence from one person. So when you think, okay, are my words and actions, they're lasting? They do. You're also 3 times more likely to remember a negative comment than a positive comment. So someone could say, multiple positive things, and that one negative comment is going to be something that you remember. So when you're speaking with your difficult person, really start changing those words as best you can in that relationship to have, frankly, an eternal perspective in your words, and make sure that they're honoring God and not you and your feelings. Verse 26, the reminder and suggestion. You don't want to do this because of who you belong to. Do you speak this truth into others' lives? That is hard. There's a choice. You have to choose wisely. So are you speaking truth into others' lives? So David also, God will fight for you. David was thankful for God sending Abigail. He didn't snap or dismiss. He was thankful. David isn't young. He should have been wiser at that moment. So it's not like they were talking to David and he was like a 12-year-old that just was like trying to figure out, like, come on, Mom. Like, he should have known better. He should have been wiser. This shows us that our chronological age cannot always be the guide on we're just always going to make great decisions just because we're adults. We're not. Verse 39, David thanks God for keeping him from making a terrible mistake. We need to make sure that when we have that person that comes in our lives, they're doing dishes and they turn around and they say something, that they're saying words of love to you, that you're thanking God for them in speaking those words. So let's go on to Abigail as a recap. She's mentioned 17 times. It's so tiny. So she was used as a conduit for Christ. She was married to a difficult person. She encountered a difficult situation because of her difficult person. She then had to meet another difficult person in their difficult moment to apologize for nothing she had done, but she still took the blame. Whoa. She sought peace. She was shown Christ, and so what she did is because she had Christ with her, she showed Christ to others and pointed others to Christ. She was a wise woman who was married to a difficult person. There might be somebody in this room. Marriage is hard, let alone like when you just are married to a difficult person. We know she marries David We also know David fell into temptation with Bathsheba. That's another difficult situation and another difficult person, but she was wise and is labeled as being someone with discernment. And so you're like, she probably continued to be that way since she's not mentioned like in the future. I don't want to put something that isn't there, but she probably remained wise and discerning. Abigail didn't panic. So when she had a situation, she acted with haste, but she was very clear thinking about what needed to be done. She was clearly expressed that Nabal was a fool, and she knew that. She'd been there, she'd done that. So she really knew, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is what I need to do. She's very clear-headed. Abigail teaches us how to deal with difficult people. Have you ever tried to solve something where you say, oh yeah, well you? That doesn't work well. I would have been able to if you hadn't. Or you could say, I'm sorry for this misunderstanding. I could have been clearer. I mean, or you don't have to say anything. You could just, like, even if you feel that someone's being funky and acting weird, just get over it. It just isn't about you. If someone has come in, it is not about you. Do not live with them. They did not feed you in their house. It probably has nothing to do with you, but you actually could speak into their life and encourage them. She shows us how to deal with the difficult person in a tense moment. She used discernment for haste, but also space. She allowed space with Nabal. Both situations didn't need her. They needed Christ. She probably lived in violence and stressful situations. Difficult circumstances make difficult people. We don't know much about Abigail beyond the mention that she gave birth to David's second son, but we do know what was in her future. Difficulties in the past and in her future in her most intimate relationships. In her most intimate relationships, she had difficulties. Well, guess what? If you're calling on the Lord in those difficult relationships, they're also going to help you in other difficult relationships, because as long as we're on this earth, we're just going to encounter difficult people. There's no magic pill to keep us away from everyone unless we have a hermitage and choose to not be around anyone at all. And we're not going to do that. So she had self-control in her attitudes and responses. She acted quickly, which means she also used her energy wisely. Quickly to act, but also quickly to close her mouth. She moved in courage and wisdom. And I love that her servant came to her. It probably was like he was risking his life to come to her. But he came to her because he knew he could trust her. This shows that she was trustworthy. Are you all trustworthy? I mean, can people come to you? If no one's ever come to you over anything, ooh, maybe there's something in there you need to kind of look at. She sought peace. She shouldered the blame. Isn't it interesting how we see how food was used to bring peace? She spoke to David, and surely some of his men heard that conversation. But the food and hospitality spoke to the men. They were ready for slaughter, not snacks. They were ready. But wouldn't that stop you in your tracks if all of a sudden someone showed up with here is this feast, here are all these snacks? You would be like, what is happening in this moment? You would have someone's attention. It would stop you in your tracks. Again, food is a great resource that we have. She chose her words wisely. She had a keen eye on the bigger picture. God's plan was so much bigger than the feelings of the moment. God is with us and has a plan, even when the parts don't seem to make sense to us. He has a plan. Even when the parts make us feel bad, He has a plan. Even when we don't see any way out, He has a plan. She honored God, and she put others before herself. She was discerning, approachable, and humble. She showed respect, and she was faithful in her words and deeds. And that's how we should be. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for giving this opportunity to study your word and to really learn more ways that we can be like you, that you're molding us by using our difficult person, that you're molding us by using our difficult relationships, that you're molding us in ways we don't even know how you're going to use them. What we're experiencing right now could be something that you're going to use tomorrow, in a week, in a month, in a year, or 10 years from now. We don't know, but we trust that you have a plan for us, and we want to honor you in word and deed. Thank you so much for caring for us so much that you've not only sent your Son, but you've given us the Holy Spirit and the Word to love you and learn more about you every day. We love you so much. Thank you for giving us this time to honor and worship you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.